Hi, welcome back. This is the South African Morning. Now, the latest StatsSA survey indicates white children are 4 times more likely to have been offered more remote learning options by schools. This compared to black African children since COVID-19 had started. Now, KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng had the highest rate of remote learning, while the Northwest province had the lowest. So, for more on this, we're joined by Statistician-General Mr. Risenga Maluleke. Mr. Maluleke, always a pleasure talking to you, and good morning to you. Let's talk about the numbers and what they tell us now, just in terms of race, white children and, black children, and the percentage that we're seeing in terms of remote learning options. What are the numbers telling us?
Firstly, to me, and indeed, let me greet the viewers, it is consistent with what we have been making available on the issue of education or any other social setting, that we have a more advantage from the white population group than we have on any other population group, particularly when you look at white and black African. And indeed, we have seen that the white population group had facilities in terms of internet connectivity where they could connect from home. So remote learning was a lot more easier. And when we look at provinces of KwaZulu-Natal as well as Gauteng, which were sitting at higher proportions, and indeed the Western Cape, which was sitting at similar proportions as the national average, but otherwise any other province was lower, and the Northwest being the lowest. That is the one part. But we also picked up that children who were of ages 0 to 6 did not attend school. There was a larger chunk of those children 0 to 6 who didn't attend school during the highest levels of COVID restrictions. And of course, it's because these children cannot care for themselves when they are in facilities, as in education facilities.
And that's quite important to note, Mr. Maluleke, because we know that most of, pupils and children who come from poorer households or even communities dependent on feeding schemes, so their meals, rather, or at least some of their meals throughout the entire day, were from school. So if they were not going to school, it means they were staying at home, but it also means they were not getting food.
Certainly. But one of the things that we picked up is that even those that tended to attend school, because we are not looking at a specific highest level of restrictions, we are just looking at the year 2020 particularly. But we are picking up that those from lower quintiles, that is, they are not as well off as those from higher quintiles, tended to be attending schools where there were feeding schemes. And these children would be more black African than they would be white children.
Right. Mr. Maluleke, I want to talk about the schools as well, because you did mention early on that obviously the schools that were in more suburban areas or that most white pupils attended were most likely to have internet access. When we look at the percentages of schools that did offer remote learning options, how many were there generally around the country?
We are talking of about 50% of those schools that were able to offer remote learning, and the majority of them were in urban areas than in rural areas. Yeah.
So are we saying that the ones in rural areas offered more rotational scheduling or rotational, learning as opposed to remote learning?
Certainly. The fact to me is that the ones in rural areas don't have facilities of connectivity from home as in internet.
Right.
And we are also looking at ages 5 to 24. So those who were doing school and not necessarily as in secondary school, who are in higher ages as in 24, ages of 24, would sometimes tend to pick up connectivity from work. But those who were at a basic education level, the only way they could pick up connectivity is at home. And because connectivity at home was at lowest amongst your black Africans and the coloreds, generally better amongst the Indians, Asians, and indeed quite higher amongst the white population group. The ones in rural areas had to do with rotational learning because they don't have tools to do so in terms of learning from home.
But also surely, Mr. Maluleke, you've seen a difference even geographically, not just in terms of race, different provinces, some showing an increased number of remote learning, but other provinces showing a very low percentage just in terms of those options in remote learning. Take us through the differences you saw there in provinces.
Let us start off by saying that usually on any other issue, the Western Cape and Gauteng are better off when it comes to resources, whereas it's issues of pay or anything. But one thing that we picked up was that this time it was KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng that were standing off at about 8.6 each, proportions of 8.6 each. And then when you look at the Western Cape, it was sitting at the national level of 8.3% of those that were able to participate in remote learning. Whereas if you look at provinces like the Northwest, Free State, Mpumalanga, were falling below national average. Actually, all other provinces other than the Western Cape, which was at national average, and KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, which were higher, all others were below national average.
That's important information there for us to consider, especially looking at the education system. Mr. Risenga Maluleke, thank you so much always for speaking to us and sharing, of course, this data with us.